You're live on the cloud. Now what? The journey is just beginning. All right, thank you everyone. Thanks for joining us again for this podcast series focused on Oracle quarterly releases. I'm really happy to be joined by Kevin Sippl today, a director on our Oracle Cloud team. Kevin, thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kyle.
So today I'd love to get your perspective on plan and preparation. So what do our institutions, organizations out there live on Oracle Cloud, what should they be thinking about as they prepare and plan for their next round of quarterly updates?
Yeah, it's a process that really starts pretty quickly right after you're done with your previous quarterly release and getting that into production. So for better or worse, there's not a lot of downtime if you really want to think through everything and have your schedule really laid out in advance. I think one of the first things that once we've got one quarterly release knocked out and stable in production is starting to look ahead at our environment plan. And so thinking about when do we have our environment refreshes scheduled for the upcoming few months, looking at when that next quarterly release is coming and trying to make sure we can request from Oracle soon enough to have the next refresh that we want to bring our production data down into the test environment where we want to do our next round of testing. So I think that's one of the initial things we definitely want to look at. Thinking about what the business cycle in our organization is at. So depending on the time of the year, when this next quarterly release is coming, thinking about, is that going to be a big push in our hiring season where we might have some things that we want to specifically test, or we might run into specific bandwidth issues from certain areas of the organization, whether it's the HR team or it's going to hit a month-end close, the end of a financial reporting quarter, different things of that nature. So those are things that I think are good to think about well in advance when we're doing that sort of scheduling.
I think those are all great tips, right? And you focused on a few different things there: resources, functional capabilities, technical capabilities. One thing that you touched on right at the beginning is you could start preparing for your next quarterly update as soon as you finish the last one. So do you have any suggestions on how an organization can maybe fight off any fatigue related to quarterly update activities and really be ready to dive right into planning and preparing for the next release?
Yeah, because it is something that then it can be a little intimidating that seems to never end. I think some of those activities can be handled, but a lot of planning can be done a little more centrally, and it can be done further on in advance. So your organization knows going into the new year, like what your payroll processing schedule looks like for the year. You should generally know when you'll be running into other bandwidth possible challenges, or other times just when the ability and or appetite for accepting change in the system and the technology or in our business processes, when that may be easier to implement versus be more challenging. So I think getting some of that laid out, some of that can be done, that work can be done a ways in advance, so it's not something you have to repeatedly be starting from scratch each quarter. You can do that a little further in advance. So that would be one way to hopefully not feel that constant pressure always.
Yeah, I like that tip a lot, right? If anything, we know the quarterly updates are predictable. We can tell you 12 months in advance exactly when it's going to happen. So maybe don't just look one quarterly update ahead, look 2 or 3 or 4 ahead. I really like that suggestion. So Kevin, I was hoping you could touch on for a moment the importance of planning, and especially planning in terms of resource bandwidth and dedicating the right resources to really take advantage of all the great features and functions that come as part of every quarterly update.
Yeah. The quarterly releases and knowing that schedule in advance, that's great, being able to plan around that. Although knowing the schedule doesn't necessarily mean you have always the bandwidth or the resources and the hands available to execute on all of the pieces that come along with a successful quarterly update. So one of the really important things is that within the organization that we coordinate across areas and across teams. So knowing that, the technical team needs to be on point for prepping for those environment refreshes, setting up test accounts and security issues and troubleshooting. The functional teams need to be ready to actually execute some of that testing more from the end user perspective. And then the other teams that are supporting the Oracle solution, so your configuration and system support team members who will actually be executing the config changes, will help troubleshoot any issues we run into, and as well as the change management team. So when we have a change coming in a quarterly release, whether the user interface is going to change or we're going to tweak a business process, we have to be ready to document it and then communicate it out, possibly train on it. And so all those teams need to be communicating leading up to actually getting to that next quarterly release, so we can be ready for each team to play their part in that, and making sure that the successful rollout of that change is able to occur, and making sure that we have those people identified and having the bandwidth to actually execute on those things.
Really great points. It's a collaborative effort, and we have to take a comprehensive approach to looking at the resources needed. I completely agree with that. We also have to be flexible. Each quarterly release is a little bit different in terms of the features and functions that are going to be packed in there. And to learn a little bit more about our release notes analysis approach, I hope you join us for our next episode in this series. But Kevin, thanks for your time today, and thanks for your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. It's great talking with you.
We hope this session helped you see through the clouds. See you next week.